Colin Cowherd had a lot of interesting comments on Denver Broncos quarterback Russell Wilson. He had some comments about the organization as well, a lot that we can poke holes in and say that is not true. We addressed that on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. On top of that, what's going on in the latest with the head coach search? You get that and much more from the South Stands to the end zone.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. It seems like as this head coaching search continues to build on, there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of speculation about coaching searches, but all of a sudden, it's the national media's chance once again to put out hit pieces and character assassinations on quarterback Russell Wilson, something we'll dive into on today's episode of the show. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host and my good friend, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com, not to mention a wearer of many hats here on the podcast. Sayre, my friend, I just feel like, okay, the attention on this Broncos team has been fixated on the head coach, right? Who's going to be the next head coach? And we've heard various national media outlets, including Colin Cowherd, be open about Sean Payton and the Broncos, what's going on there. But then earlier this week, Colin Cowherd used it as an opportunity to create some false narratives about Russell Wilson that we have addressed previously on the show, but more so we're going to poke more holes in his argument that he has.
Right. And it's really interesting to see because I think it was just late last week that everybody was kind of enjoying Colin Cowherd's reporting on the Denver Broncos and their head coach search, right? I mean, he was talking about Sean Payton. And, I work with Sean Payton. I spent 4 to 5 hours with Sean Payton. Last night is what he said at the time. I can't remember exactly what day it was, but he was talking to him all about how, Russell Wilson legally reached out to him and, how it sounds like they would really love to work together and how Russ knows he needs fixing and this and that. It all sounded good to Broncos fans. It all sounded good from the, vantage point of hoping that Sean Payton could potentially be interested in coming to Denver. Now, all of a sudden, what's he saying? The latest clips that we have Colin Cowherd saying, I'd pass, after all this talk about, rich ownership, and you'd get that's the number one thing for Sean Payton. Isn't that interesting, Cody, that we're now hearing a completely different tune from Colin Cowherd as the Broncos have sort of stretched this process out, right? That's kind of what it feels like, kind of what it seems like. It seems like a lot of posturing here on both sides.
Well, and even Colin went to the great extent of saying, about Russell Wilson, he's washed, or he talked to an executive that thinks he's washed. On top of that, he also said some things that I can tell you with 100% certainty from directly speaking with players. That is false. He said Russ doesn't spend time with younger players. That is incorrect. I mean, Russell Wilson, the moment, even training camp, he invited every undrafted rookie free agent wide receiver, every offensive lineman. They held kind of a walkthrough in the morning leading up to training camp. And all throughout the season, they had State of the Union kind of addresses where it wasn't like mandatory. It was optional, and everybody was invited. Undrafted wide receivers, practice squad players were invited. Offensive linemen were invited. Not everybody attended, right? But a good portion of the Broncos offensive players, the intricate parts, skill players, they all attended this stuff. But the fact that he doesn't spend time with young players, like, okay, we're talking about the team facility, that's false. He does do that. Away from the field, you know what else is false? That is false. He spends time with a lot of these players, a lot of offensive players away from the team facility. So I just hate how these assassination attempts on his character start to come out. Look, I think we can all be very upfront here. Did Russell Wilson play good football for the Denver Broncos in 2022? Absolutely not. He played the worst football of his career. But to the fact that we go to these great lengths, and I know a lot of fans do this as well, and I understand this comes with the territory of being a fan. A lot of people hear the stuff that Cowherd says, they grab onto it and hold onto it as if it is the gospel, and they become okay, that's the reality, that's the truth. Colin Cowherd has no connections inside the Broncos building. Nobody is going to talk to Colin Cowherd. Colin Cowherd never pokes his face around things. He's saying these things because you know what it does? It generates discussion on social media. And, of course, it's prompted us to do a whole entire show about it. But I think it's important because we see so many of these false narratives created by guys like Cowherd all the time. and because it impacts, like for some, Sayre, it drives me nuts because I'm there every day. In season, I'm at every practice, I'm at every press conference, I'm in the locker room talking to players, and I just hate when these things from people who aren't around, they say these things are going on when they're really not going on. To me, I think that's the most frustrating part about this. And, on top of that, Russell Wilson's also taken on a mentorship role for several important young players as well.
He has. I mean, we heard during training camp that he and Sayre both had taken KJ Hamler under their wings, right? You look back at the San Diego workouts that he had. A guy like Brandon Johnson, an undrafted rookie, was invited out to do some of that additional work. And it wasn't just like the young rookie players either, right, Cody? It was like Kendall Hinton got invited out there. Eric Saubert got invited out there. Andrew Beck. It wasn't like Russell was picking and choosing, all right, let's get the starters out there and let's have everybody, not everybody come out. He was working with Kendall Hinton, developed a chemistry with Kendall Hinton, had great early chemistry when Greg Dulcich was drafted, right? I think that was pretty abundantly clear during OTAs when everybody's talking about, remember the Greg Dulcich hype train that was only slowed down by a hamstring injury. I remember it, Cody. I'm old enough to remember it. So, man, I think that it's so fascinating to me that when the Broncos were undefeated at the time, right, back in the offseason when they hadn't yet played, everything was just swell with Russell Wilson working with these young guys, taking KJ Hamler under his wing, inviting the undrafted rookies out to work out with him at his complex in San Diego, getting that early chemistry with Dulcich, getting chemistry with Kendall Hinton, a guy who had been working his way, wasn't even really on the radar until late last season when he started having some big performances. It's so interesting to me that the narrative has changed now because people want to say that, well, Russ isn't relatable. And I think there's degrees of truth to some of it, right? I think it's not super relatable to be rah-rah when your team is playing bad.
100%.
But at the same time, he's been consistent, man. He's the same guy that he was a year ago, and I think that there's going to be some adjustments made. Let's rest easy knowing that. I think that there's a self-awareness there from Russ that, like, he gets into that mode of the cliche that he say, the things that he says at the end of games, or the things that he says to like, I'm not what does he say about adversity? Basically like, I'm not opposed to adversity, or I'm not. I'm not going to shy away from adversity. He says all these things that you don't really remember because they don't stand out in like a specific way. It's not like the Tebow speech. Remember back in the day at Florida when he gave that epic rant, which I think people would have loved to have seen from Russell Wilson, by the way. But he's the same guy. He takes players under his wing. And so for this kind of stuff to be coming out, it's nonsense. And like I said, could it be posturing?
I think a lot of it is, and it seems as if all of a sudden, for a guy like Colin Cowherd, who has a big platform, by the way, who was building up the Denver job, building up Russell Wilson, building up Sean Payton, has all of a sudden backtracked in the course of a week. You want to know why? Because a lot of what he says isn't true. A lot of what he says is false. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that on today's episode of the show, including why he believes the Broncos job isn't as appealing and why nobody wants to go be a head coach there. You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers, join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/Locked On. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Perfect for AFC and NFC Championship weekend, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Continuing on our conversation on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, you can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format if you like listening to us, or you can watch us on YouTube as well. You can criticize Sayre's fashion that he has, you can criticize the colors that he wears, or you can criticize apparently my radio voice here on the podcast. We appreciate you, everybody in Broncos country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Continue on with this conversation about Colin Cowherd. Obviously, you could see where there's holes to be poked in the things that he was saying about Russell Wilson, but now there's also been some things that he's saying about the Denver Broncos that seemingly I think he continues to forget how uninformed he truly is on the Denver Broncos, and one of those things being, and he said it yesterday in his interview that he was doing, or his show that he was doing, Denver doesn't have any draft capital. How many times do we have to have this conversation? How many times can a guy in the national media get this so blatantly wrong, Sayre? I mean, to me, it's very, very puzzling for a guy who supposedly talks to people and knows things. He doesn't seem to know much.
He doesn't have the Tankathon tab opened up on his browser, does he, Cody? I
No.
mean, it's pretty easy to look up what a team's draft capital is. Or if you're wondering what the Broncos draft capital is for 2024, just type this into Google. Denver Broncos future draft capital. There's a page out there that, go figure, has what they actually have in terms of draft capital, and you can see that for yourself. You will discover, I believe it, that the Broncos have in fact a first round pick in the 2023 NFL draft. Believe it or not. I think Bradley Chubb, maybe did he just not do enough for the Miami Dolphins for people to remember that it cost the Dolphins something to get him? I don't know. I mean, it's so bizarre to me. Or the fact that, remember, George Payton, Cody, he made a trade during the 2022 NFL draft with the Indianapolis Colts at the back end of the third round. He sent them a pick, and they sent forth a 2023 third round pick. So contrary to popular belief, the Broncos have 3 picks in the top 69, which is very nice. You can sound off in the comments as I'm saying that out loud. You get the nice out of the way. You know, they have 3 picks in the top 69. They have right now the 49ers first round pick, which will be in the back end of round 1. They have pick number 68 from Indianapolis, and they have pick number 69, which is their own third round pick. And then they have another pick at the top of the 4th round and the 5th round. So, I mean, Cody, it's just, do we have to really spell it out like this all the time? I think it's so fascinating to me that people have Google at their disposal. They have people like us who are talking about it all the time. They have Twitter. They could they could look these things up instead of taking one. So where's Colin Cowherd getting this information from? Who's he? Sean Payton himself corrected Colin Cowherd on this mistake that he made. So I just think, man, it's so funny to me. But even if, let's say the Broncos didn't have draft capital, Cody, what is something else that they do have? Well, they got deep pockets and they got free agency. So there's more than one way to upgrade a roster. I think it's so ridiculous that people are still talking about, and they still are acting like the Broncos won't do anything in free agency as well. So I don't know. What's your perception on all this? And like, why are people missing this, or why are they blatantly ignoring it? I don't know I don't even know where to go from here, Cody, with it, because it feels like we've had this conversation a billion times at this point.
I mean, that's the thing. And I think that's probably where I get the most frustrated, being in a role where I'm covering the team every day up close and personal, because people are listening to people who aren't there. People are listening to people who have no clue, who don't really talk to anybody. They just say random things. And because they have a massive platform, people grab onto it. Like I said, they hold onto it as if it is the gospel. And you can see that because sometimes we see the same comments kind of posted on Twitter. We see the same comments posted even in our YouTube comments about some of these things. It's like, no, that's actually not true. Like there have been a lot of comments that Denver doesn't have any draft capital. I'm like, they do. They do have draft capital. So I think just kind of the fact that we have to repeat ourselves is frustrating at times, but I understand. It's like information in today's day and age spreads like wildfire, and misinformation does the same thing as well. And there were also some other things too. And here's another hole I want to poke in what Colin Cowherd had said. He says, I spoke to an NFL executive. I can guarantee he probably didn't speak to an NFL executive. Not many people in the actual football operations world like Colin Cowherd. They don't like him. And they know that what they say, if they do tell him anything, is going to get circulated out there. Anything that's off the record will be spewed out there. I could easily go on this show, Sayre. I could easily go on my radio show that I have in the afternoons, and I could say, well, I talked to an NFL Hall of Famer. I talked to an NFL executive in the league office who told me this. I could easily say that stuff. But I know based on what Colin Cowherd is saying, and especially all the misinformation he's pumping out about what's actually going on in Denver, tells me he hasn't really talked to anybody. One of the things that he said is, I spoke to an NFL executive. He said Russell Wilson is washed. He wasn't saying that realistically last week. He also criticized Russell Wilson for having his own, massage therapist. Every player does that. I don't know if people realize this. Our good friend Mario Vitanzi as a chiropractor, works on a multitude of different Denver Broncos. They have different people, different health workers that help keep their bodies in shape all season long. So it's not like a secret that Russell Wilson's got his own guy, because every player in the NFL does as well. So I want to shut that narrative down. But on top of that, can we say, okay, we acknowledge it. Is Russell Wilson washed? Sayre, I don't believe that he necessarily is, right? And I think that right now the jury is still out, right? He's got to play in 2023, and we have to see him play better in 2023 before I think we can confidently say Russell Wilson is washed, because as you and I have pinpointed, we've seen too many different things of his game this year that suggest that he's not washed, but there's a bigger issue to be had. Is that the offensive scheme? And as we saw in the final 2 weeks, for some reason the scheme changed. Russell Wilson changed as well.
I think there's plenty of reason to believe that with a permanent scheme change to something that does suit his skills a bit better, that he could be, back to the thing is that people saw this decline from Russell Wilson, Cody, and they saw this decline and they immediately think that means that he was declining to like a below average to worse than below average. The dip that we saw in 2022, like you said, was the worst he's ever played as an NFL player. Every year before that, if you look at the peaks, the valleys, everything was well above the NFL average in terms of, accuracy, QB rating, touchdowns, rushing yard. Like, he's one of the best quarterbacks to do it in the last couple of decades, I would say. In my opinion, just if he wasn't a Bronco, I think we could safely say at the career body of work that Russell Wilson has, very impressive, Hall of Fame worthy. I think it's one thing to think that he's cooked. It's another thing to think, okay, was 2022 an outlier? And I tend to believe that many or most, and I don't know this for a fact, Cody, although like you said, I could say, well, I talked to an NFL executive who thinks this, because there are people who have said this. There's people out there that believe and understand that 2022 was probably more of an outlier for Russell Wilson than it was the new norm. And I think that people see this decline that was going on before he left Seattle. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the future holds, but I refuse to believe, and I've said this many times, I refuse to believe that Russell Wilson is cooked. I refuse to believe that a historically top 10 quarterback, one of the best all time in terms of winning, accuracy, rushing yards, all of the above, that he's just all of a sudden become bad. And I just can't reason with that in my brain. I would rather go down on the ship believing that it's not true than, stand victorious knowing that it was true all along. So that's where I'm at with it, Cody. And I hope that other people see it that way. I hope a lot of it, whatever NFL executive told that to Colin Cowherd, you better believe they're either competing against the Broncos in terms of the on-field. They don't like Russell Wilson because they work for Seattle, or they're trying to get Sean Payton as the next head coach, and they want to make the Broncos job seem as bad as possible. So people got to understand there's more to this than meets the eye initially.
I agree with you there. In Broncos country, we are always eager for your thoughts on the subject matter. What did you think of Colin Cowherd's comments about Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos being a potentially non-appealing job in his opinion? Let us know if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section down below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and follow so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. But on today's episode of the show, we're also going to continue. What is the latest on the Broncos head coaching search? There's always some drama going on with that. We'll address that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. And with the PrizePicks app, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. These players will have a projection that's set by PrizePicks, and you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their PrizePicks projection. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. The hunt for the next Broncos head coach continues, but there were some rumors and speculation earlier in the week that caused some concern in Broncos country. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or you can watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, like I said earlier, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. We have you covered every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. There was a little bit of a scare on Tuesday night, Sayre, in Broncos country when Jeff Duncan, who we had talked about a little bit earlier in the week, had said something along the lines in an interview that Rob Walton, Broncos controlling owner, was hunting, which is why the Broncos had not yet scheduled interviews. I hope, like I said, I was thinking about it at first and I was like, well, we haven't heard anything about the Broncos and, second interviews and, what they had going on, what they had planned. If this was true, this would be a very, very bad look for the Broncos and for an inexperienced ownership group that is now stepping in the football realm of things. Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff that's come out that said that is, blatantly false. It is not true at all. Denver is going through the process thoroughly, so we'll find out maybe what we can take from that. But ESPN's Jeremy Fowler says that Sean Payton is expected to be a finalist. This is something you and I have been talking about and reporting on all week here on the show. And some league sources say many around the league, including some of the candidates for this job, have considered Sean Payton as kind of the top target for the Broncos job perception-wise, which makes sense. But, at this point, the Broncos have seemingly committed to, go through a thorough and extensive process here without letting much get out on their end, which I know is frustrating many in Broncos country.
That's right, Cody. Things have been very, very quiet, to just throw in the little hunting thing there because, man, it's gotten so bad to the point that people are making stuff up, like the owner on a hunting trip, which, with that, I think it was a believable story based on how little we've heard, right? But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, if that's true, that's kind of a problem, when this is an urgent matter for the team that you just paid $4.65 billion for. There's other teams in competition. I guess whatever your process is, man, but I'm thankful that was debunked and proven to be false because that would kind of make me feel a little uneasy about what's the ownership's real priority here? What's their goal? What's their I don't know. I found that to be a very disturbing rumor. So I'm glad that it was proven false. But you're right. Everybody out there seems to connect the dots between Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos. It seems like that's not necessarily the Broncos haven't. They probably could have had Sean Payton back for a second interview at this point, right? That's how I see it. They could have had him back. They could have already offered him a deal. They could have, there could be reports out there right now that, man, the Broncos have figured out the trade side of things with the Saints. They've agreed to compensation with Sean Payton. They just need to bring him in for the second. If they were super all in on Sean Payton, you feel like these dominoes would be falling, but it doesn't seem that way. And I don't know what it is. I don't know who they're after. I don't know the top candidate, but like you said, they're committed to the process, which has involved one of the biggest things that we've learned, the fact that David Shaw, the former Stanford head coach, has emerged as a legitimate candidate. Also, it sounds like DeMeco Ryans kind of blew the team away with his interview. So if they're committed to the process, does that mean they're committed to waiting until after the Super Bowl? And what does that mean for Sean Payton? Where do they stand with things? If he's really the top candidate, I don't know. Do they want to wait to schedule second interviews until they can get DeMeco Ryans back for a second interview, Cody? Where are the Broncos going to be the first domino to fall? It doesn't seem that way. Other teams are lining up second interviews, but right now it does feel like things are kind of in a state of limbo. Like I said, it kind of makes sense that the owner would be on a hunting trip because it doesn't feel like anything has happened. The most that we've seen Mike Kliss reporting over the last couple of days is Todd Helton's, MLB Hall of Fame candidacy and then debunking the hunting rumor. So if that's what we're getting from the guy that's reporting in Denver, it's like, I don't know. So I don't know where to go with it. I don't know where to go from here. But I think that there's, signs still pointing to Sean Payton being the number one candidate. Like I said, a lot of posturing happening from both sides here. So maybe in the end, we'll look back on that and kind of say, okay, yeah, that was a lot of that going on behind the scenes.
Well, on top of that, too, I know that there are some people who are wondering why can't they interview D'Amico Ryans a second time? Why can't they interview him this week? The NFL has made it to where, obviously, if you have potential head coaching candidates that are coaching in championship weekend, you have to wait until after the NFC or AFC championship to be able to get those second requests in to interview them at this point in time. Like, you can request it, but you have to wait until afterwards to actually be able to interview them that second time. So, I mean, that could be the hang-up in this situation. And as it stands right now, there is no team in the NFL that has made a head coaching hire. So, I mean, Denver's pretty much on par with where everybody else is right now. And I know that we all want it to be now. Trust me, it would give us a lot more clarity on how to operate. Okay, hey, this might impact how the Broncos approach free agency, so on and so forth, personnel-wise, coaching-wise. We have all these things we're going to talk about in future episodes of Locked On Broncos here, but as of right now, we can only just wait and see what happens with the Broncos head coaching search. And one thing is for certain, when the hire happens, you'll have an emergency breaking news podcast here on Locked On Broncos. You can get that free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or you can get us on YouTube as well. You can watch us on your TV at home. You can watch us on your smartphone or your computer. We appreciate you so much for rocking with us and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Whatever's going on in Broncos country, we have you covered. You'll get that on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.